My dear soul warriors, how are you? I hope this video finds you well. The other day I was watching a video which sort of triggered this video. The video was about a lady who was talking about her divorce, and she talked about how she married a man who didn't want to tell his family that he wanted to marry her, and he couldn't tell them because they wouldn't accept her. So they kept it a secret. They got married, and then afterwards when he told his family about her, then things just spiraled downwards and the marriage ended. Of course, that's a very difficult experience to go through. And I went and scrolled down the comments because this lady has a really large following. And I read the comments, I read some other comments, and I didn't see a comment particularly mentioning the fact that when you do marry in this sort of way, where the families are not involved, and in fact there's conflict with families, then naturally there will be tension from the very beginning of the marriage, and it can cause a whole load of other issues. So I didn't really see much discussion around this. So I thought I should make a video on this subject, and especially in the light of the Quran, what the Quran says, and looking at the Quranic wisdom on this matter. I thought it would really help us because I think we live in a society today where these sorts of marriages are happening a lot. I mean, I've personally seen them as well. And I know that, people do get into conflict with their families over who they want to marry. And sometimes there are legitimate reasons for why their families don't want them to marry that person, but the people involved can't see those red flags for themselves. And sometimes it really is a matter that families are objecting when there's no really good justification to object, which I've talked about in previous videos. But in this video we're going to talk more about the situation, the case where there is a legitimate reason and families are objecting because there is a reason to. So the angle that I'm taking will be more geared towards that, but then also sort of objective understanding of the Quran and seeing what the Quran has to say about this matter. And let's see what conclusions we come to. And I'd love to hear your thoughts as well. Like, do you agree? So we'll be looking at if it's best practice to keep a marriage secret according to the Quran, and if eloping is encouraged or discouraged, and also what role the families have to play in this process. So the Quran describes marriage as a sincere legal contract. It's not a casual arrangement. It's not a temporary thing. It's a proper, sincere legal contract that's taken with responsibility and accountability. It says in Surah 4, verse 21, "And they, your wives, have taken from you a solemn covenant." Now, while I'm going through these verses, feel free to open up a tab and look up the verses for yourself, because I've often just taken extracts. I've not put the whole verse into this because the verses are quite long. So I've just taken like the most relevant bits to the point that I'm trying to make to, give you a reference. But feel free to go back and, you can go on like Quran.com or use a Quran app, or if you have a physical copy of the Quran, then you can find the references that I give to you. So this one's from Surah 4, verse 21, where it talks about the solemn covenant, Mithakan Ghalida. So the solemn covenant is basically a serious contract. That's what it means. That this is a contract that's made with sincerity, with genuineness. Surah 5, verses 5 also defines a valid marriage as a public commitment to chastity, explicitly forbidding relationships based on either fornication or secrecy. And that verse is here. And permissible for you in marriage are chaste, believing women as well as chaste women, neither fornicating nor taking them as mistresses or secret lovers. So, sorry, where it says chaste women, I've cut that part short, but that's about chaste women amongst the captives as well. So that both groups of women are permissible in marriage. And we talked about captives as well in a previous video. So feel free to go and watch that one if you want to learn more about that subject. But here, we're talking about secrecy in marriage. So here it clearly says that don't take partners in fornication and zina, and don't take them as secret lovers either. Therefore, by condemning the act of taking secret lovers. The word is akhdan in Arabic for secret lovers. This verse makes it clear that a hidden union is illicit and contradicts the Quranic requirement for marriage to be an open, honorable covenant. A covenant or contract by nature requires clarity, witnesses, seriousness, and accountability. It cannot be hidden in secrecy. We're going to talk a bit later about why this is. Now, witnesses are also required. When speaking about divorce, the Quran commands, and call to witness 2 just men from among you. And this is in Surah 65, verse 2. So, if witnesses are required even for dissolving a marriage, then of course, in the beginning of a marriage, which is the contract that you're dissolving, you would also require witnesses. You would also require it to be witnessed. Otherwise, the covenant would be weaker when it begins than when it ends, which makes no sense. Termination of a contract would not require more legal formality than its establishment, right? So that's another reason in arguing that marriages should be public, not secret. Secrecy belongs to illicit relations, not marriage. The Quran contrasts marriage with secret affairs. In Surah 4, verse 25, it says, "Marry them with the permission of their people and give them their due compensation according to what's acceptable, as chaste women, muhsanatin, not fornicators, غير musahafitin." Sorry about my pronunciation, it's not the best. But it says that, chaste women should be taken in marriage, not as fornicators, not those that, have the wrong way of life, nor should he take secret lovers. Okay, that's in Surah 4, verse 25. Marriage is therefore distinct from hidden liaisons. A marriage kept in secrecy resembles what the Quran warns against, doesn't it? Because here you can see, and you'll see more in the next part here about the family involvement as well. The Quran consistently shows families and guardians involved in marriage, permissions of guardians. So marry them with the permission of their people, ahlihinna, and give them their dowries in fairness. So this is in Surah 4, verse 25. And then there's also the example of Musa alayhi salam. He said, "Indeed, I wish to marry you to one," not Musa alayhi salam. This is about Musa alayhi salam's father-in-law, who said to Musa alayhi salam that, "Indeed, I wish to marry you to one of these, my 2 daughters, on condition that you serve me for 8 years. But if you complete 10, it will be of your own accord." That's in Surah 28, verse 27. Now, I was reading this and I've reflected on this many times. And often I think that these days, imagine if someone was in this situation. I guess if someone was, as Musa alayhi salam was at that time, he was fleeing from his homeland because, he feared that he could get caught and persecuted because he accidentally killed somebody. So even though Allah forgave him for that, but at that time, he didn't have any shelter, he didn't have anywhere to go. So he was in a situation where he needed everything. He needed shelter, a place to live, etc. He needed provision for food, etc. So he was in a situation of vulnerability, and he happened, well, Allah orchestrated for him to find all of that in a household, and also a wife and family, everything in this one place, just because he offered to help these 2 ladies, one of them who was later on his wife, but he helped them with their sheep to water their flock when he himself was in a time of need. And although he didn't tell them at the time that he was in need, he managed to get all of these wonderful blessings. So I sometimes think that in this day and age, could this still pan out? I think it would in some parts of the world. I think this sort of thing still does happen, definitely. But in in general, you should do your due diligence and, find out who it is that you're considering rather than rushing into a marriage. In general, I would say that is important to do, especially in the society that we live in, where certain qualities and certain traits that were the norm back then are probably not the norm back right now. So definitely do need to do due diligence. But yeah, just sorry, kind of like digressed a little and just went off on this topic. But this is this is a story that I think about often, especially because, in this story of Musa alayhi salam getting married, it's literally detailed so beautifully, and you can understand exactly what happened step by step that led to Musa alayhi salam getting married. And he came upon this blessing easily as well. He made a dua, he sent forward a good deed, and Allah answered him and gave him all of that. I just think it's a lovely example to think about, and also to think about how it could apply to this day and age that we live in. But the point of this example here in this context, in this video, is to show the involvement of family in the Quran, because, it was Musa alayhi salam's dad who asked Musa to marry, sorry, Musa alayhi salam, did I say Musa? Musa alayhi salam's father-in-law. I'm sorry, I'm tripping over my words. Who asked Musa alayhi salam to marry his daughter. So family involvement is mentioned time and time again in the Quran. And this particular story is in 28, Surah 28, verse 27. So these verses also show that marriage was not supposed to be a private arrangement alone, as family and guardians were involved. Now, why does the Quran discourage secrecy? Or why would we assume that secrecy should be discouraged? And I would say that there are a number of reasons why it could be better not to marry anybody in secret. No, the first reason is, it can protect you from bad decisions. Families can spot red flags that individuals in emotional vulnerability may miss. And sometimes this is hard to grapple with, this idea that someone might know better. But, your families have known you for your whole life. And, often, especially if they look out for you in other ways and they show that they care and that they love you, then they most likely have good intentions for you, and they probably do want to see you get married, and they do want the best for you. So if they are noticing something that is a red flag, and even if to you it doesn't seem to be a red flag at the time, it might be worth just listening and hearing their point of view, and pondering over it and thinking about it for some time, taking it seriously, because there might be something in that they're trying to protect you from. The other reason is to guard against exploitation, because isolation makes a person more vulnerable to manipulation and denial. Now, I've seen examples of this in my real life, but also the video that I was referring to at the beginning of this video, which I watched, which triggered me to make this video, also was a situation where, she was getting mistreated in that marriage. And so this happens quite a lot when people don't have the backing of their family, they don't have that protection from their family anymore. So if something goes wrong, then what can you do? You don't really have much support or people to turn to. The other reason is preserving family bonds, because a marriage joins two families, not just two individuals. So secrecy can fracture the trust and weaken kinship. So, like I said, your family is there for you for your whole life, since you were a baby. So you want to maintain, the bond that you have with them rather than break those bonds. So it's best to try and bring them on board, and, or, if they have genuine reasons to object, then to listen to what they have to say, to preserve that blood relation that you have with your family. And then another reason is that, which I've already kind of alluded to in the previous point, but I said that, you get support from your family. And that support is not just in bad times, but also in good times. So your families stand with you during not just crises, but also in regards to looking after children, if you're ill, and also, if there are any disputes, then your family can be there for you. They can support you. A secret marriage cuts you off from that safety net. Your family also knows you best. Their judgment adds wisdom to your own. Often, at least one family member genuinely does want the best for you. And so that's something to think about. Also, accountability and reputation. Public marriages protect individuals. It says especially women, but I'd say women and men. It protects both from being abandoned or denied later, because I have known of men also to get sort of caught up in these secret marriages, and they've been abused and manipulated and mistreated. So it's not just women that are at risk here, it's men too. And I think until you see an example of it, you might not be able to relate to that, but I've seen examples. So I know that, this is a difficult situation for men as well as women. And so it's best to just try and avoid that situation in the first place. And, you see married men and women on apps as well. If they've married in secret, he will know, he will be able to verify that they are married except for their spouse, and their spouse doesn't even know that they're on the marriage apps. It's not just the ones that marry in secret that are on the marriage apps. There are also people, obviously, that have married publicly with public announcement and they're still on the apps, and even they don't get caught. So what chances do you have to get caught if you're in a secret marriage? And that's not good for anybody. That's not good for society. So there might be some rebuttals to the points that I'm making. So you might be thinking that the Quran doesn't explicitly say that you may have witnesses for marriage. But I would say that the Quran requires witnesses for divorce. So a greater covenant cannot require less formality than its dissolution. The greater covenant being the marriage itself. The second objection might be, if two people agree in private, that's still a marriage. Yes, but the Quran forbids secret liaisons. A hidden arrangement looks like what the Quran condemns, not what it permits. I know it's not a direct command to make it public, but it's kind of implied. Kind of implied that it's done with other people knowing about it. And the third objection is that family approval is cultural, not Quranic. The rebuttal to this is that Quran explicitly includes guardians in 425. In the verse 425, you can have a look at that. It also regulates families in verse 232 of Surah 2. And it also shows family participation in Surah 28, verse 27. So it's not cultural. There are verses in the Quran that show that you need to take permission from family, and family involvement is definitely alluded to in the Quran. Sorry about that notification. So witnesses alone are not the whole picture. Quran requires witnesses for divorce in 65 verse 2. But for marriage, the Quran adds family permission and participation. So getting married with just two witnesses is not sufficient if you're looking at the Quranic point of view, because if witnesses were enough, then verse 25 of Surah 4 would not mention ahlihinna, as in, getting permission for marriage from their guardians, their families, their people. It wouldn't mention that. So I would say witnesses are necessary, but they're not sufficient. You do need to get permission from the family too. Marriage is not just between two individuals. And also remember this, that this has been the norm in many cultures, even outside of the Quran, outside of Islam. In many cultures, including the one that I live in, British culture, usually, families are sought in this process, for their opinion, for their approval before marriages happen. So even in non-Muslim marriages, generally that is the case. Obviously, eloping happens in non-Muslim marriages, but usually and traditionally it's been the case that, for example, if a man wanted to marry a woman in the English culture that I live in, traditionally he would go and seek the permission of her father, of her parents, before that marriage takes place. And still a lot of people do that today. Not some people, a lot of people still follow this practice today in amongst the non-Muslims as well. So it's not just this is not just Muslim culture. Marriage is not just between two individuals either. As I've also talked about before, families get involved in the caretaking of children. They are there to serve as a support system as well. So a covenant, which is mentioned in Surah 4, verse 21, they, wives, have taken from you a solemn covenant. A covenant implies public binding responsibility, not a private arrangement. And 425 openly forbids secret liaisons. I know that's referring to um, zina in that context, but it is also about, also alludes to secrecy. So you could argue that the Quranic model of marriage involves families, because Musa married through his wife's father's involvement. And then there are some other points here. Widows remarrying, Quran addresses their families as well, telling them not to obstruct if women want to remarry. And also captives, we've talked about that in a previous video, that, their guardian's permission is required for that. So yeah, family is key. I'm not going to go through all of this now because I've already talked about it in depth. We've already talked about this too. Yeah, so now we can talk about family bonds. So the Quran places family ties right next to God consciousness in Surah 4, verse 1. And be mindful of God, through whom ye ask one another, and the wombs, which is interpreted to be family ties. Surely God is ever watching over you. And also, there is a verse talking about how parents should be treated with respect. And so that also shows the importance of being good and loyal to your parents. So when you have a secret marriage, it shows lack of trust. Hiding something so major means not trusting your family with your happiness, but also it can show a lack of respect, because if you're bypassing your family, especially when your family wants good for you, then it excludes them from their rightful place. It makes them feel like they don't matter, their opinion doesn't matter, that they don't matter to you, you don't care what they think. And that damages kinship, because marriage is supposed to unite families, but secrecy divides. Now, these are some verses or some references that you can look at. Probably won't go through all of these in detail, but some things I will highlight. So, a lack of trust. Trust is valued in the Quran heavily. Secrecy undermines that. And also, I mentioned the lack of respect, kinship. So, in simple words, secret marriage doesn't just risk the individuals as it injures the family bond itself, which the Quran tells us to guard with taqwa. It shows lack of trust and respect in action, even if the words claim otherwise. Now, I have made some assumptions during this talk that I've been giving to you. So, just for full clarity and transparency, I'm going to share those here. I'm not going to read through all of this, but if you want to pause the video and read through it, you can. These are some assumptions that I made. So you can bear those in mind if you want to. Family involvement is the default norm. Secrecy, and yeah, just a few more. Trying to go slow in case you want to pause. Okay. Right, let's go to the final position. So from Quran alone, a valid marriage must be public, not secret. I'm saying Quran alone because I want to, like I've said in previous videos, I feel that we need to know, first of all, what the Quran says. This is the authentic message, the divinely revealed message from Allah. We need to know what this says, and then we can take the opinions of other sources and other people, the scholars, etc. But we first need to understand, what does the Quran say? And Allah has given you intellect. He's made all of us, we all exist with brains. So we have to use them, and we're all capable of doing so. Sometimes we just need to have that bit of confidence in ourselves that we know we can use our brain if we want to. And we can think for ourselves. We don't need to be given permission from others. Allah has given you permission to read and understand the Quran, which He has sent to you, which has been revealed to you. So definitely, take that responsibility to do that, and not just rely on other people to tell you. You have to do the work yourself. Obviously, it helps to discuss and listen to other opinions and perspectives and understand things from new angles that you may not have understood before. But the responsibility, the onus of you understanding the message from God is on you. So from the Quran, I would say that a valid marriage should be public, not secret. I'd say this is Quran inspired. I'd say that these things that I'm saying, like, they're inspired by the Quran. Obviously, ultimately, the way I understand the situation is subjective, and the way that you would understand it is subjective also. But yeah, this is what I'm gathering from the Quran. I see it as wisdom. And so, yeah, my closing statement, therefore, is that marriage in the Quran is a fortress of chastity, a solemn covenant, and a union of families, not a hidden deal. Keeping it a secret injures trust, disrespects families, and contradicts both the text and spirit of the Quran. Let me know if this video helped you, and if it helped you to see this subject from a new light. And also, if you were thinking of eloping and now this video has made you reconsider, then also I'd love to hear from you. So feel free to leave your comments down below. And also, if you like this video, give it a like. And if you're new to my channel, then feel free to subscribe for more content about the Quran and reflections about the Quran and other things too. So feel free to check out my channel, my other videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time, inshallah.